I was brainstorming ideas for PLC topics, and I was thinking, wow, we all hold as educators these books we have either loved, used in class, and we just have a bunch of ideas in our heads. How cool would it be if a PLC prompt, either a team meeting, department meeting, whatever you have, was like, what texts would you recommend for this upcoming unit that students are just going to love? And then I was thinking, okay, so what are the types of questions that would guide kind of that? Because I think there's, as adults, we often have like things that we would jump to. And then I was like, oh, I want to create a worksheet for like having people think through some of this stuff. And then it became very ELA focused, but I ultimately created something that you could literally just hand directly to students. So it became very student facing, even though the prompt initially was thinking about adult conversations and recommendations. So go do the adult recommendations if you want. But if you want to take a look at some of the questions that might guide the conversation, a worksheet you could literally grab in the description of this video and use with students, I'm going to walk you through that. I'm up with, again, this is something you can hand directly to students. You could also use this to generate some ideas within your PLC, getting teacher recommendations. If you are familiar with What Should I Read Next podcast hosted by Anne Bogle, she is amazing. The podcast is great. I highly recommend it. These first two prompts are pulled from her, and I shortened it just to think about students. There might actually not be a ton of books they like. So she usually asks 3 books you liked, 1 book you did not, and what are you reading lately? I also imagine maybe students aren't regularly reading right now, and so that might be a tough question for them to answer. So I've adapted 2 books you liked, 1 you did not. And then I pulled this from Storygraph. So last week we did the Storygraph episode, and that did like kind of a walkthrough and a voiceover of my ideas of how to use that. Feel free to check that video out if you have not already. But this is the kind of types of books list that they have in their app. So I just kind of pulled this over. Another question that they ask in Storygraph is plot-driven, character-driven, or both. Like, what was this book? So when you review it, you can tag it as those things. So if you prefer a book that's plot-driven or character-driven, that information is embedded into Storygraph. So if you're looking up options for students, you can definitely kind of use what is tagged already in their platform to inform this. And I think another question that I pulled from Storygraph is like, do you need to love the characters? So one of the things they have in the review is like, you know, are the flaws of the character a main focus of the book? And to me, what I think about when I think about that, whether this was their intention or not, I don't know, but I think about like, it can be hard for me to get on board with a character who is just like not meant to be lovable. It's just like making horrible choices, is like not a great human. Like it can be challenging. So for me, it's much more enjoyable to read a book where I love the characters. And so I think this is an important question for students to consider, right? Some of these questions are just helpful to just throw out there to students. They might never have thought about their reading choices or their reading preferences because like they haven't really had an experience with reading that might be positive. So I think another way to think about this is if a student's like, you know what, I don't like reading, I haven't had success with reading books, think about your favorite TV shows or movies, right? And so do you like the themes that are, you know, adventurous or relaxing? Are you able to watch a film that is sad, or is it like really not enjoyable for you, right? Like probably the same thing is going to map onto your book selection. And same with like, right, I think all of these are relevant for like a lot of different types of media that are not just books, and that can inform their book desires. Here, I debated here bringing over the checklist from Storygraph that was related to trauma and trigger warnings and content warnings, I think is what they call it in the app. But I didn't want to potentially traumatize someone just by reading through the list of things. I figured if a student wants to let me know if there's content that they want to avoid, like they're probably going to be aware of that, and they're going to be able to write it in. If they do want a list, or if you feel like there could be a list, you can definitely go into Storygraph once you create your account and like just look at like open up a review for a book you read and like look at what their dropdown is and just paste it over. But I chose not to. Also, just for simplicity of like the page, I didn't want to overwhelm. So this is nice that it fits all on one page. And then finally, is there anything else you want from a book? So for the student who really does know what they love, they can go ahead and share, like, these are all the things that I want in a book. Now, again, through the PLC lens, I think you can answer a lot of these. This is very ELA facing, but I think you can adapt a lot of this stuff for like any sort of text
that is in a class. For example, a science video that's describing a particular concept, right? Does it have humor in it? Is it, contextualized or decontextualized? Do you need to be aware of any like content triggers or content warnings that are in that video? Here are two, videos that I loved about the science topic, and here's one that I absolutely didn't. Avoid this one at all costs, right? I think you can kind of use this as a jumping off. There's a little bit of a 2-for-1 in there. So PLC minded, definitely share some good ideas for text, but also feel free to share this with your students and see what they say and let their ideas and self-reflections deepen, as well as informing you about what they could read next.